When it comes to the character of Nightheart, there's a lot to talk about. Nobody feels the same way about him. Part of this is a pretty big fandom divide that we have going on. That being, a large amount of the fandom just doesn't read the books. And when you get all of your new arc information from secondhand sources, the biases and opinions of the writers of those sources are going to be seeping in. And I'm one of those sources. While I like to talk about the books and my opinions on the characters, do keep in mind that what you hear from me about how I feel about these situations is a step away from the actual material. This is true for sources like the wiki or spoiler summaries you might find on other websites as well. This is why you see people saying things like, Nightheart chose his own name, when he didn't. Every name he gets is forced on him. People fully believing that Sparkpelt purposefully left her apprentice-age children in the broken code when she was actually forced to leave by the imposter, and Finchpaw chose to go with her when Flamepaw didn't. And like a dozen other weird ideas about the whole situation. But I'm only here to talk about his non-Sparkpelt related angst, as that's a whole thing that I'll have to go over in some other video. Nightheart's main struggle is trying to live up to the expectations of his clanmates. Just kidding, not really. Not at all, actually. He says this a few times, but it's never actually shown on page whatsoever. The expectations of his clanmates are largely things like actually passing your assessment, and not showing off so heavily while you're doing your job that you get no job done at all. Additionally, he has mommy issues that I don't really want to cover in this video. While he has lots of silly and made-up reasons as to why he fails his warrior assessments and doesn't do well hunting, namely things like they just want to keep me an apprentice forever so there's someone to clean the bedding and other nonsense, every single time he considers his legacy name and the discomfort it brings him, it comes back to the same thing. Nightheart's problem, repeated more than anything else, is not being Ginger. Nearly every time that, while named Flamepaw, he thinks about his original name, Firestar's legacy, or the expectations on him, his immediate thoughts are about not even being orange. He's using it as an excuse to say he was meaninglessly named after another cat, which takes away his individuality. He's arguing that by naming him Flamekit, they're forcing Firestar's legacy on him when he doesn't want it. Never mind how many of his clanmates are named directly after cats they don't resemble. He's not actually actively compared to Firestar by anyone at all in the first book until he passes his assessment, his third assessment, where his mother attributes his success to his Firestar lineage. This is a valid thing for him to be upset about, but his thought process still turns around and eventually gets down to being named after him when he isn't orange. Going forward, it's clear that his real problem is intended as not being recognized for his achievements, of which he doesn't have many, so it's hard to tell, and instead his successes are being attributed to relation to Firestar. But in River, nearly all he cares about is just not looking like Firestar. Consider this exchange he has with Sparkpelt in the middle of River. Sparkpelt ate quietly for a few moments, then raised her head, giving Flamepaw an awkward look. I've noticed, I really couldn't miss it, that you seem to be struggling with your apprenticeship. While she was speaking, Flamepaw felt his pelt begin to burn with shame and discomfort. It had felt really good when Sparkpelt had stood up for him, and now she's nagging me, just like any other cat. It must be hard for you, his mother went on. That Finchlight was made a full warrior when you weren't. Is it making you anxious? What do you care? Flamepaw blurted, his old anger building inside him. Sparkpelt looked even more awkward, clearly finding it hard to meet Flamepaw's gaze. I care because you're my kit. Oh, sure, Flamepaw scoffed. There are high expectations of you because of your kin, Sparkpelt went on, ignoring the interruption. You belong to a family that's done great things for our clan. Alderheart, Squirrelflight, Bramblestar, all the way back to Firestar. Flamepaw finished bitterly. Yes, and I can understand that you wouldn't want that pressure. Alderheart and I struggled under it too, but we can't control who we are. We can't control what our clanmates think when they look at us, or how they chatter when one of us is, struggling. But it's a gift, really, having Firestar in our blood. I don't want it, Flamepaw snapped. He hadn't planned to say that, but when he saw Sparkpelt staring at him in surprise, he knew he had to justify himself. I never asked to be Firestar's kin. I don't feel like Firestar's kin. Every cat says that you look just like him, and maybe Finchlight has a bit of orange on her pelt, but I'm an all-black cat. Sparkpelt was also factoring in things like being related to the leader, deputy, and medicine cat, but Flamepaw's main point, before he falls into a pit of mommy issues later in the conversation, is, I'm not orange. I do not have even a little bit of orange on me. You have given me a name that doesn't directly reflect my physical appearance. He has more problems with his mother, but when it comes to his name, it's boiling down to kitty cat hair color. But he feels no struggle in being related to Bramblestar, despite the fact you would assume that that was a larger and more imposing problem, with him being more closely related and still alive. But Nightheart loves Bramblestar. Bramblestar is his favorite person until Sunbeam enters the picture. He doesn't think about why he's not like Firestar, orange aside. He doesn't go, Firestar is these things and I am these things, unless he's talking about being ginger or not being ginger. Sparkpelt says there's high expectations on him because he's related to Firestar, but outside his final assessment and following warrior name ceremony, only one cat seems to imply that they expect more of Nightheart. It's the elder Brackenfur, shortly before his more revealing talk with his mother Sparkpelt, trying to cheer him up in Chapter 7 and be reassuring. He's reassuring him that he's of great lineage and he's sure to live up to his kin, but even here, all he's doing is trying to tell him he'll be fine and using the bloodline as proof of that. It's not, you need to live up to Firestar's legacy, it's, you should believe in yourself because this is your family, which sure isn't particularly helpful either, but it's meant as reassurance for Nightheart and he knows that. Lilyheart expects him to do well on his first assessment, but this is because she thinks Nightheart is a good hunter. He fails this by trying to show off. On his second assessment, he thinks about cats are always telling him he's special. We never see anyone tell him he's special, unless you count Sparkpelt listing off all of the famous people he's related to, but she's clearly, seemingly going towards a point that, yeah, Alderheart struggled with his apprenticeship as well, or something like that, and he doesn't have any of it and changes the subject there. He doesn't actually talk about being uncomfortable being named after Firestar with his mother or sister or anyone. He thinks about how he was sort of named after him. He uses the term sort of named after Firestar twice. He assumes why his mother named him Flamekit, but because he never actually has a conversation with Sparkpelt about it, we don't even know what sort of thought went into it. For all we know, it could have been a Lark Song's idea. He does talk about not looking like Fireheart with Sparkpelt, but he doesn't relate that back to his name when talking to her. Almost all direct comparisons to Firestar before his final assessment are him thinking about how people compare him or how he was named. Sparkpelt tries to comfort him about his kin and how they're a lot to live up to, and tries to convince him that being related to Firestar is a gift. Well, doesn't try to convince him, starts to convince him. But she doesn't say, you're so much like him. She says, there are high expectations on you because of your kin, and as mentioned before, lists off Alderheart, Squirrelflight, and Bramblestar first. When she does eventually directly compare him to Firestar, it's in the wake of an achievement. He's actually passed his assessment. Most of the drama about if or not he's directly associated with Firestar comes up after his name is changed to Nightheart in the second book. But it's not like anyone expects anything specific of him. They just want him to be able to pass his assessments and do his job. The problem is that they then attribute his good qualities to Firestar-like qualities. Back when Sparkpelt is telling him why others have high expectations, which we don't actually kind of see them doing, she's trying to explain that there's pressure behind being related to high-profile cats. She tells him she and Alderheart struggled with it. I think this is only true with Alderheart. But she's not even specifically talking about Firestar. She's talking about the whole dang ThunderClan royal family that they're directly descended from. Their direct kin, his grandparents and his uncle, are all in the positions of power. There are no other positions of power in the entire clan, and they are all his direct relatives. Jayfeather too, but this arc is being pretty weird about Jayfeather. But we never see expectations of being like Firestar, just comparisons to Firestar. When he passes his assessment, Sparkpelt says, "So you passed," she meowed. "I'm so proud of you, Flamepaw." "Thank you," Flamepaw responded, feeling closer to her than he had in a long while. "I knew you could do it," Sparkpelt continued. "After all, you're a descendant of Firestar. Being a skilled hunter is in your blood." So she's attributing some of his achievement to Firestar. But this makes it into a different problem. He's not nothing like Firestar in that case. He's competing with Firestar. He's being compared to him as opposed to being recognized as his own cat. Up until this point, this wasn't really a legacy we saw any of the other characters really pushing for. Sparkpelt sympathizes with being related to famous people, but she doesn't say, "I expect more from you as someone who's related to famous people." She then blames the famous person when he actually does succeed, but it's a different situation. At the end of River, he rejects the name Flameheart that was chosen by his relatives to reflect further perceived similarities with Fireheart. Even as he's doing so, his main point as to what makes him unlike Firestar is, "I just know that I want something that reflects the cat I am, not some cat from the past that you all wish me to be." His anger overflowed and he spat the words out. "I'm not Firestar. I don't even look like him in case you haven't noticed. I will think of the perfect name for myself and let you know." He isn't allowed to do this by his clanmates, and Bramblestar chooses a new name for him in the end, but keeps the heart suffix as he still believes that Nightheart resembles Firestar in non-physical traits, but seemingly attempting to honor Nightheart's feelings in that he gives him the Night prefix instead, and we're left on that until the next book. Like I said before, a common misconception is that Nightheart chose part or all of his own name. This isn't the case. He does see Nightcloud and go, "Wow, her name is so suitable for the color she is, not like me," but he doesn't choose Night. Bramblestar renames him and came up with the Night on his own, and even keeps the half of the legacy name that doesn't mean orange, very purposefully and deliberately continuing to tie him to Firestar. Going forward from here, he clashes with his family, including Finchpaw, who initially stood up for him over the name change in the gathering scene, when defending this action again, and it's still all about not being orange. He mentions that Sparkpelt wanted him to grow up to be like Firestar. He mentions the burden of Firestar's legacy, but he has no problem whatsoever still receiving the heart suffix as long as his name doesn't imply he's got orange on him anymore. He even uses the fact that heart is still in his name to say, "See, I didn't reject the name, just the orange part of it," when he's arguing with Myrtlebloom. He rejects one Fireheart-resembling name given to him by his family and accepts a second Fireheart-resembling name, although less so, given to him by Bramblestar, without any disappointment or resentment, even though disappointment and resentment is harbored in almost all of his interactions with his female family members. And the fact that he's so blindly accepting of the heart bit just makes this come down to, yeah, when it comes to his name, he cares mostly about not being named Orangely. And obviously this is reflected in his narration because, all of his thoughts about Firestar in the first book are thoughts about Firestar being an orange cat. He doesn't want to be directly associated with Firestar, but logically, sharing a suffix, especially given Bramblestar's reasoning for it, that being, "That is the way of this clan, and like it or not, Flamepaw, we see some of Firestar's qualities in you," he is being more directly tied to Firestar than having a similar but not prefix before. He is told outright that he is keeping heart because they see Firestar's qualities in him, and they replace Flame with Night to make it match his pelt color. And he's like, "Oh good, yay, the problem is solved, now they can see me for who I truly am, a black cat specifically, not an orange cat, hee hee hee. So glad that I am not being compared to Firestar anymore." Completely ignoring that the heart suffix is explicitly stated by his grandfather to be reflective of Firestar's traits. Being named Flamekit isn't that weird. Not all cats have names that reflect their appearances, or even make any sense. We have cats who were named One Kit and Tall Kit. There's a kit in ThunderClan right now named Bristlekit, even though she's orange and white like Stemleaf when Bristlefrost was gray. The first part is largely meaningless, and he's not even directly named after Firestar, but instead he's given a close name, much like Sparkpelt's own name, or his dead sibling Flickerkit's name. Theoretically, and I'm not saying across the board because there's definitely trends, names in Warrior Cats, 1, are not gendered, and 2, don't mean anything. And I'm talking specifically about the first part of the name. It can be anything, and it is anything. At one point, Nightheart thinks about if or not his dead father would have approved of the name Flamepaw, but in Scrufflight's Hope we're told explicitly that Larksong and Sparkpelt named their kits before they were even born. It's knowing that Larksong has named the stillborn kit one of their chosen names, specifically the name that they had already chosen together for the kit, that gives Sparkpelt faith that he's safe in StarClan and closure that she needed to take care of her children. And what I'm getting at here isn't Nightheart is wrong to not like his name. You can have any reason to not like your name. Not having your name match your pelt color is a fine reason to not like your name. But thematically, going forward with what the book is trying to tell us, heart should be his problem. Being compared directly to, measured against the idea of Firestar, is the problem. Bramblestar gets up on High Rock and says, well, if you're so upset about having a name that doesn't exactly and directly correspond with what you looked like at birth, I'll fix that, but we're keeping the bit where we give you a name that defines that you're just like Firestar in the ways that actually matter. And he has no problem with this, even though beyond not being orange, his actual legitimate concern, his one concern, is about his achievements being attributed to Firestar's blood. But the name that represents who you are, your achievements, your adulthood, that's the suffix, that's the heart bit. The first part is meaningless. That's the name that they were given as kits. It doesn't reflect them, it's not intended to reflect them, but we've been told multiple times that the suffix is intended to reflect who they are. I mean, sometimes it's just like pelt or whisker, which is really, really embarrassing for them. But in the end, more than anything, the fact that he doesn't look like Firestar is the biggest deal of all to him. The fact that he wasn't named in a way that reflects his exact appearance bothers him. Now, this is intended to reflect feeling like he doesn't have his own identity, and he can't be seen as an individual when he doesn't get a name that's fully his own. And getting one that's an echo of his great-grandfather's, that's the problem. I get that. But this wasn't a solution to that problem. While he seemingly eventually realizes that his issue within ThunderClan was largely a communication problem, as, most of this was just things he thought about and never things he really talked about with anyone, it's weird he accepted this name change as a solution to begin with, as all Firestar represented was being a cat of a specific pelt color, and Bramblestar literally saying, I still see you as resembling Firestar despite this doesn't upset him at all. And okay, it's not weird. He says it over and over again. He repeats, I'm not Ginger, I'm an all-black cat, like a million times as his main reason for feeling weird about Firestar's legacy. And you could argue, easily, that he's using the color as a scapegoat. He feels uncomfortable with the legacy of his great-grandfather, and he's putting that on pelt color arbitrarily because he simply wants to be seen as an individual and not as a Firestar clone. But that, frustratingly, isn't on the page. This isn't a character inconsistency. It's just unrealistic that this character exists who, no matter how much I try to scrutinize and make sense of his struggle with words that are actually on the page, he attributes color as the defining trait of Firestar. But let's pretend, okay? Let's pretend for a second that he is just using the color as an excuse, and the real problem is this big looming legacy of Firestar over his head. Half of ThunderClan is descendants of Firestar. Firestar's blood doesn't mean anything. Firestar's lineage doesn't mean anything. The fact it's written as if Nightheart's line is uniquely struggling with Firestar association is bad? When, thanks to Lionblaze, a huge chunk of the clan is now descended from Leafpool. And, of course, Sparkpelt seems just as focused on the rest of their direct kin, Squirrelflight, Bramblestar, Alderheart, as she does Firestar, which would make this all make more sense if Nightheart cared one bit about living up to Bramblestar's legacy or Squirrelflight's when he decidedly doesn't respect her. The character of Sorrelstripe is exactly as related to Firestar as Nightheart is. Fernsong is exactly as related to Firestar, Spotfur. If most of the current ThunderClan youth were to get together with any other young warriors, they'd have Firestar, not Nutmeg through Cloudtail, which is a couple generations removed, Firestar on both sides of their family tree. In fact, it almost seems like having Firestar on both sides of a family tree is actually being deliberately avoided. Even if nobody on the writing team cares about having Frostfur on both sides of a family tree, luckily we'll probably have much less problems with this kind of thing going forward, as the new Warrior Cats code will save us from all the family trees leading to Frostfur. But, I'll talk about that stuff vaguely soon, some other time. But on the page, Nightheart is very focused on what he naturally looks like. He's very focused on his appearance matching his name directly. He gets jealous of other cats who have names that more directly match their physical appearance that they were born with, and feels like others are pressuring him to live up to the one he was given. He wants to be named for what he's immediately perceived as. The issue is comparison. It's being compared to Firestar. It's what makes Firestar different from other cats. It's having his achievements measured up to this cool old dead guy, but becoming a warrior is the achievement. And giving Nightheart the heart suffix is the reward for that achievement. That's 1,000 times more meaningful than the flame part, especially with it being literally presented that way at the end of River. Despite the meaning behind it, Nightheart feels more comfortable this way, and that's fine. I like a narrative of a character changing their name and then feeling more comfortable with the new name. That's great. But what I'm bothered by is the fact that he was uncomfortable with Flame, but perfectly fine with Heart, even though this is his reaction when he gets named that.
"Then by the powers of StarClan I give you your warrior name," Bramblestar went on. "Squirrelflight tells me that you showed extraordinary patience and ingenuity in your last hunt, just like Firestar. To honor that connection, from this day forward, Flamepaw will be named as Flameheart, and we welcome him as a full warrior of ThunderClan."
Flamepaw stared at his clan leader, his mouth gaping in shock. He couldn't believe the name his clan leader had given him. It was bad enough that Flame was part of it when he was a black cat, but now Bramblestar wanted to burden him with Firestar's warrior name too. Will they ever appreciate me for who I am? Meanwhile, yowls of approval broke out from the assembled cats. Flameheart! Flameheart! Flamepaw gathered every scrap of his courage and held up his tail for silence, raking the crowd with a grim gaze. Bramblestar could not have spoken words that would have hurt him more, to speak of his kin at a special moment which should have been for him alone. He felt as though his heart had been pierced with icy claws. Even the first book, before the second book, makes it out as if the worst part of this name is Heart, because it is. Now, it's easy to see how someone could relate to Nightheart, especially with enough headcanons, for any reason that they would want to change their own names. Anything that they would want to do to feel more comfortable as themselves. I know for a lot of people, it was especially nice in the most recent book to see Sparkpelt, after initially not understanding his choice in the matter, saying, "I see you, Nightheart." It's about him having a unique identity, for being recognized as Nightheart, and not as a copy of another dead person. By book 3, they make it clear that the idea that they were going for, and what they wanted to say, was Nightheart going, "I am myself, I want my accomplishments to be attributed to me, and my skills to be attributed to me, and not inherited talent from this dead guy I didn't know." And there's no problem here with that moral conceptually. There's no problem in relating to it. It's just really built up in a super flimsy way and conveyed really sloppily, and mostly the problems that he has are problems that he made up for himself in his head. And I struggle to empathize with him, for several reasons that I'll eventually talk about. But on this subject specifically, if they're trying to make a narrative about him choosing a name that he's more comfortable with, why in the world did they make the reason something as arbitrary as pelt color, especially when Heart has so much more meaningful an association with Firestar from the very mouth of Bramblestar, the man who named him? If it's about being yourself and who you truly are, why is the physical appearance being used as the metaphor instead of something more abstract or personal to him? Nightheart says, "Please judge me by what I look like, actually. I'm a book and I expect you to be looking at my cover." He doesn't want to be compared with Firestar, but what is the reasonability of this whole situation? Why are people comparing him with Firestar? Sparkpelt actually looks just like Firestar and is named with a fire-adjacent name, and Nightheart thinks that this is fine because she looks like him. How is that better? Sparkpelt has 10 times less of a unique identity than Nightheart does. Looking identical to the person she's named after isn't going to make this easier for her. In fact, it would make it worse. The fact Nightheart thinks it is devoid of any sort of consistent in-universe logic. And we've had this over and over again. In the first arc, we had Bramblekit, who looked identical to Tigerstar. He didn't have a name that invoked Tigerstar at first, thanks Firestar, but he looked just like him. And I don't think I even need to go into detail about how that was a problem for Bramblekit. When it comes to names, thanks to Cinderheart and, again, Lionblaze, a huge chunk of ThunderClan is legacy kittens. Don't ask me why Cinderheart of all cats decided to have a litter where she named all 3 of her kits after dead people. Maybe she actually really enjoyed being possessed. Don't ask me. What about Hollytuft? Hollytuft is named after and identical to Hollyleaf. She is the spitting image of her, and you can't tell me that to Lionblaze and Cinderheart, the cats who named her, who were any better with comparisons to her dead kin than Sparkpelt was. She was named after Hollyleaf. How much baggage can you imagine Lionblaze has there? It's not even like she was this good, heroic hero like Firestar, being named after Hollyleaf, who, even if you know as little as possible about her activities, ran off for a year and, quote-unquote, accidentally killed a guy according to Bramblestar, and then died horribly. That's a lot, but we never hear anything of that. Obviously, Cinderheart, Sorrelstripe, Fernsong, Stemkit, Bristlekit, Greykit, and probably Leafshade were all named after other cats as well. If this is true about Leafshade, they actually named her while Leafpool was still alive though, which is sweet. Rootspring in the last arc was also a legacy-named protagonist. He was named after Root, Tree's father. So, we watch Nightheart get upset about a subject where a huge chunk of his clanmates, including his own mother, have it worse than he does. Nearly all of the young people are about as related to Firestar as he is. Half of them have legacy names, just like he does, and in fact they're directly named after other cats instead of giving a unique prefix like flame versus fire. And you would think, from any logical standpoint, that he could look at Sparkpelt and go, well, at least I'm not orange like Sparkpelt, as opposed to, I'm not even orange like Sparkpelt. It would just put more pressure on him to also be orange. Gosh, he even goes into detail. He's like, my sister, Finchlight, she has a little bit of orange on her. Me? No orange. None. Can you believe that? But regardless, what I'm getting at is that the book presents Nightheart's name doesn't match his appearance at birth, which is bad. And it doesn't really line up with or showcase the actual moral and message presented. That is, Nightheart wants to be recognized as a very special boy outside of being related to Firestar. I really honestly wish that if they had wanted to go with this kind of heavy legacy story, that they had made this more about the actual traits Firestar showcased. The name represents being named after Firestar, even though he has nothing to do with Firestar. He resents being given a name in honor of someone else, and that really should be more of what he focuses on instead of just, I'm not orange. And obviously, as the story goes forward, it does showcase in actual interactions with other people that what frustrates him is a comparison to Firestar. What frustrates him is things that are about him being attributed to Firestar instead. But when it comes down to his identity, who he is as a cat, and where he differs from Firestar, and why he doesn't want to be compared to Firestar, in the first book, usually his example is just, I'm an all-black cat, I'm not orange. And again, him enjoying his new name and liking it better for himself, those are all good traits of this book. But tying a plot element like this to his legacy causes problems, like the fact that most of the clan is related to Firestar, or the fact that such a huge chunk of the clan has legacy names that are identical to the people they were named after instead of being sort of like the people they were named after. This could be saved by him focusing on the legacy of Squirrelflight and Bramblestar narratively, but he doesn't. It gets brought up in his narration, but he doesn't really care about it. Not in the way he cares about Firestar, that's for sure. But the thing that bothers me the most is him embracing the heart part of his new name, when it was given to him almost passive-aggressively to say, here, you actually are just like Fireheart, and I'm going to give you the most important part of that. But the thing of it is that this is something that Sparkpelt should be upset about. Everything Nightheart thinks applies to himself, being special, being associated with Firestar by others, applies much more heavily to Sparkpelt's character during Vision of Shadows. As far as Graystripe complaining that she's not named Sparkfire when she's made a warrior. Nightheart's entire arc would actually make a lot more sense if he did look like Firestar. But anyway, I can't believe all of these people are drawing me with orange spots when I don't have any orange on me at all. I hate the internet.